art friends, this is Selena. Today we're going to explore some watercolor brushes. We're going to do that by creating some swatch cards. These cards will be reference tools that you can use to help support you as you explore watercolor and what it can do on your own. These supplies, you can find the links in the description. This particular set of watercolor brushes I picked up on Amazon. It's a set of 12. I chose it because it was inexpensive and it has a variety of types of styles. I've been using them for a while now, and some of the bristles have started to splay. So if you find that you do like watercolor, or you're pretty confident that something you're gonna stick with, you might try a different set. I'll include a link in the description for a couple of different sets. The paper I'm using is Canson XL watercolor paper. It is a student grade paper, but it is a great quality. When it comes to watercolor supplies, invest in your paper first. It is very difficult to make a quality image when the paper is not up to par. So you can buy inexpensive brushes, inexpensive paints, but start with good watercolor paper. And the paints that I'm using are Winsor & Newton, the box set. It's a set of 12. It's got both warm and cool primaries. I will be doing another video on warm and cool and color theory and all that good stuff, but this is just an inexpensive set that has a really great variety of colors that can help you do a lot. In addition to these basics, I've got a plastic palette. Any kind of palette will do. I've got 2 cups of clean water and a spritzer to help keep my paints moist. Paper towels, of course. To get started, I cut the watercolor paper in half. I made sheets of 6 by 9, and on 3 of these I've got set up. I have 1 page that I'm going to be working with my round brushes. I'm going to be making marks for my round brushes. I've marked the sizes in this set. It came with a 1, a 5, and a 7 round, so I've made space for all of that. I'll tell you more about that when we get to that card. The second card, I've put my flat and my filbert, and I've marked it down the center to give space for both. And the third card is for my fan and my detailer, and again, marked it down the middle. Go ahead, get your paper set up, and when you come back, we'll go over brush anatomy. This particular set came with 3 round brushes, a 1, a 5, and a 7. When we talk about brush anatomy, the pointed end refers to, this is called the tip. This part here is called the belly. It acts as a reservoir. It draws the paint up. The metal part is called the ferrule, and it is crimped on 2 ends, crimped here with the brush and crimped at the handle. There is glue and a crimping holding these bristles in place. So it's important not to leave your brushes soaking in water overnight or to get them too hot that could melt the glue. Brush care is important. Without good brush care, you'll see they can start to splay. You'll see how that shows up on our image. You can still make a great painting with the splaying. What I do is I have some brush soap. This is great not just for cleaning your brushes, but also for conditioning them. When you're done painting and your brush is clean, you roll it in a little bit of soap and then you shape it. And that can help condition your brush to keep its shape. Back to our anatomy, this is the handle. So I've put water on the paint to activate it. I'm just grabbing a little bit with my brush and I'm gonna move it over to my palette. I'm gonna add a little bit of water. The more water that you add to the pigment, the lighter it will be. But because I want this to be bright, this is a reference piece, I'm not gonna add too much water. Starting with my 1, I'm gonna grab a little bit of paint and I'm gonna make marks perpendicular to the page. I wanna see what the tip of the brush will do. And I'm not rushing, because if I rush too much, there will be a little drag on the marks. So I'm trying to make them as perpendicular as I can. Then I'm going to come in and make marks holding the brush at an angle. If I hold the brush at an angle, how does that make the mark different? This is an exploration. We are trying to see, what do these materials do? How do they react when I use them in different ways? It's a tiny little difference, not much, but maybe I might want this particular style in a painting versus this one. The next type of mark I'm gonna make is some short straight lines. What kind of straight lines does this brush make? When we paint with watercolor, some shapes that we use quite often are something called the C shape and the S shape. So I'm gonna wanna see, what does this look like when I create some C shapes? And I'm gonna do it in both directions. And then I'm going to try the S shape, because again, that's a shape that we use often when we're working in watercolor. When we use our watercolor brushes, the pressure that we apply influences the type of mark that we make. This next line, I'm going to use the tip and the very top part of the belly, so I'm going to apply light pressure to make a nice long line. Next line I'm going to make is going to be firm pressure. I am not going to press all the way to the tip of the brush. When I'm talking about pressure, we can start with the tip of the brush and apply a light pressure where we're just dragging the tip of the brush. When I say firm pressure, I'm not speaking of pressing the ferrule to the paper. I'm referring to pressing the ferrule and a part of the belly. And this is firm pressure. And then we're going to do a variety. We'll start with light, press firmly, and then lift up. So we're going to do those 3 types of lines. We've done the light line. Next I'm going to do my firm line. And again, I'm applying pressure, but I'm not pressing all the way to the ferrule. So that's not going to make a good mark. And now I want to see, what does it look like when I vary the lines? When I start with light pressure, press firmly, and then lift back up. And maybe there's room to do it again. There you go. I've done this with my number 1 paintbrush, and I'm going to do it again with my number 5. I'm going to go in perpendicular to the page and see what kind of marks it makes. I don't want to start with a large bubble of paint at the bottom, because then I will be making bubbles of paint. So I'm dabbing a little bit of it off on the palette. You can also use a paper towel or the edge of the palette, whatever works for you. And here I'm doing light pressure. And now I want to see, how is that different from when I angle it? Maybe a little bit more solid. What kind of straight lines can I make with this one? And these I'm doing with light pressure. What kind of C shapes can I get with this one? Those are pretty nice. And how about S shapes? Now I want to see what kind of nice long lines I can get by varying the pressure on the bristles. Starting with a light and then a firm pressure. And now varying light to firm, back to light again. When I refer to the round paintbrush as a workhorse, I mean that these marks will help you in so many ways. This brush is very, very versatile. When we move into other videos about making shapes and flowers and things, you'll see how you can use this brush in many ways. Starting with my brush perpendicular, how do these marks make? How do these marks look? And at an angle, they look quite similar. For the round brush, the perpendicular and at an angle, they look similar, but you'll see how for our other brushes, it's quite different. So I'm gonna make some straight lines and some C shapes. You can see how these are a little bit thicker because this brush is bigger, but the end of the shape is a little bit similar. This has a little bit rounded edge, and so does this one. To make my lines, starting with light pressure, and you'll see with light pressure I can get a line very similar to my one, but with firm pressure, a nice thicker line. And if I vary the pressure, it can be a very interactive line. I'm going to set this aside and let this one dry. And let's do our flat and our filbert next. So the flats come in a variety of sizes. This particular set came with this 1/2 inch, and I collected these. You'll find that you end up collecting brushes. Every time you go out, you'll find more brushes than you know what to do with. This particular set came with flats in the size of 2, 6, 8, and then this 1/2 inch. Let's go with a 1/2 inch. That's kind of a fun size to play with. I'm gonna grab a little bit of pigment again. So remember, we started with some perpendicular lines. With the flat brush, I can do perpendicular lines this way, but I can also angle the brush in different directions to get perpendicular lines in different directions. And these marks look a little bit different. When I'm holding it this way at an angle, this is how I'm gonna get marks, which they're nice. All these different marks are gonna come in handy in different situations. what kind of lines can I make with this one? Quite a few. Whoops. So we can make lines this way with the edge of our brush or with the flat end. Now we want to talk about C shapes. This is super fun. If I were to use the edge of the brush, it makes some nice marker type C shapes, which you might use in a variety of situations. And S shapes, very similar. When we talk about lines and line weight, if I use light pressure, I get a nice solid line. With firm pressure, it's actually a very similar line. It's not going to be too different, just a little bit wider. And if I vary, start light, add some pressure, and go back to light. It kind of makes it a little swollen where I added the pressure. A filbert brush is kind of a combination between a round and a flat. It's got a rounded head like the round brush, but it is flat like the flat brush. So it makes very different marks as well. If I were coming in perpendicular to the page, it's similar to the flat with a little bit of variety. If I were to come in at an angle, they have a little rounded edge to them because you can see the rounded tip of the brush. I can imagine making some trees. Oh my goodness, I could imagine making some water waves with this, some grass or leaves. If I'm gonna make some lines, if I use the flat edge, very similar to the flat, if I make C's, this brush is really fun for making petals, flowers, leaves, a lot of organic shapes. I'm going to start with my light pressure line and then my firm pressure line and my line that does both. Start with light, make it firm, and then light again. Moving on to our last card, we are going to explore our fan and our detailer. Fan brushes, they just look fun. I can't think of anything not fun about these guys, except when we don't know what to do with it. So I'm gonna show you a few different things that you can do with this brush. This brush, the detailer, I'll also show you, is the detailer looks like a flat, but it is angled. The bristles are a little bit longer than the flat, and it has fewer bristles than the flat. These two types of brushes I have them on the same page because they are mainly for details. You're not going to paint large areas with these. When I go to get this brush wet, you'll see that the bristles grasp onto each other and create little like palm fronds. For that reason, you don't want to go into the palette with this. This is not going to get you much paint. I'm going to use this flat brush here. Grab some paint, put it in my palette, and then work from that. I'm gonna do the same types of marks, not all of the same types of marks. I'm not gonna do many S's with this, but I do wanna see what it can do when I mark perpendicular to the page. And this is the fun one. When we mark at an angle, we get kind of like that filbert, we get a little rounded edge. This brush you might use to create fur, feathers, grass. You can layer colors to create different effects. Hair, I bet you could make some very short hair. So this brush is mainly used for stippling, a stippling type effect. If I were to try to create lines, because the bristles have gathered, it creates these parallel type lines. It does have a place in artwork, but I think you'll find more versatility in these stippling marks. So the fan brush, a great fun tool. I could see just doing a whole page full of these. All right, so the detailer that I'm gonna use is size 3, and it came in the set that I mentioned earlier. It has an angled head to help you find more control in the work that you're making. We'll make similar marks to what we've done earlier, the perpendicular marks and the marks at an angle. And notice how it feels different to make the marks too. You may find a preference of one versus the other. A C shape with this brush, I could see doing a whole page just of C shapes with this brush. It feels so comfortable. All right, we'll make some S shapes and we'll make our long lines. So starting with light pressure and with firm pressure and a variety. We have made 3 swatch cards of different brush techniques. From here, we will explore different ways to use these in a future video or in a future meetup group. I hope you found this helpful. Thank you. I'll see you soon.